Hello and welcome to another episode of A Lawyer Talks, presented by me, Joshua Rosenberg. When Lord Hughes of Ombersley opens a public inquiry into the fatal poisoning of Dawn Sturgess this morning, a great deal of information will remain secret on grounds of national security. But there's one fact I can disclose today. Witnesses and families will be helped by the Coroner's Courts Support Service, an independent voluntary organisation that provides much-needed emotional support and practical assistance to bereaved families, witnesses and others attending inquests. I went to see Roe Burden OBE, the founder and driving force behind the Coroner's Court Support Service. We began by talking about her career, some of which must also remain secret.
I always wanted to work in London. So when I left school, eventually came up to London, had a secretarial training, worked at various agencies, all with an aim to go and work abroad. And I found I could do that via a government organisation. And I was posted to Karachi, where I was for nearly 2 years, and wonderful experience. And then came back to London and was trying again to get abroad somewhere else, and went to via the Crown Agents for the Colonies to Nigeria, which is where I met my husband. We got married a year later back in this country on leave, and then we went back there for another 6 years. And then eventually when the daughters were born, we came back to this country.
And when you were in London, you were doing various jobs, but you clearly had time on your hands.
Yes, I volunteered for victim support and worked with them for about 10 years. And found it very, very interesting, very satisfying, actually. You were able to help people. And then I joined the witness service, but I joined into the magistrates' courts, and I didn't find I was getting the same there. It wasn't the same. You couldn't help people so much there. And then my cousin very sadly lost her son, Tasmania, and in a road traffic accident. They brought his body back to this country, and there had to be an inquest. And when we arrived at the court, I was just horrified at the sight of people just milling around. It was a modern court. They were just milling around. There seemed to be one officer there, coroner's officer, trying to get everyone sorted for the 4 inquests that were taking place that morning. And we all had to go into the court together, which was just awful because we were listening to all the inquests. Luckily, David's was the second, and the coroner dealt with it very quickly and very sympathetically. The family came out and they just collapsed with grief. And there was no one there to see or to help me. I had tissues, there was no water available. It was awful. And I decided then that something had to be done about it. Made some inquiries. No one seemed to have done anything because there was a lack of money. Well, there always is a lack of money. And come on, you can do things without money. And so I contacted my friend Annie, and she felt exactly the same as me. And with the knowledge of the Victim Support Board, we approached the Westminster coroner, Dr. Knapman at that time. He was very, very surprised, but he said, all right, let's give it a 3-month trial. So we started off and we covered every single inquest. He was very regular, and he sat Tuesday and Thursday mornings and all day Wednesday. So I did the Tuesday and Thursday, and Annie did the Wednesday. And he put us through it. He really put us through it and showed us some really unpleasant photos that the coroner's officers and he have to look at. And you cannot but admire them for the work they do. But we survived his examination, and an examination it was. And just before Christmas, he said, this is brilliant.
Which year was that?
That was 2002.
And that's when it all started. But before it started, you must have been surprised that what you'd seen in the magistrates' courts and before that in the civil courts didn't exist in the coroner's courts.
It doesn't exist. There's no verdict. Do you know, Annie had one case where a gentleman turned up with his suitcase thinking he was going to go to prison. It was a road traffic accident. I mean, that's shocking, the lack of knowledge. It's just awful. But it's so different. It's much more relaxed. The coroners don't wear gowns and wigs. Much more relaxed. And all the family can come. And it's not terrifying. It's just an inquiry. It's just an inquiry as to what happened, to try and find how it happened.
People know very little about inquests. They don't really understand why inquests are held.
Inquests are held into unnatural deaths, violent deaths, to a certain extent, but if it's proved to be a murder or anything like that, of course it goes to the criminal court. But we do get road traffic accidents and railway accidents, which are just awful.
And what support can you give to somebody in those circumstances?
Well, what we do is what the volunteers are trained to do, and they have a 3-month training, so, we're very, very careful. And they meet and greet the people when they arrive. Everyone, not just family, witnesses as well, anyone who turns up. Even some odd lawyers have arrived not knowing. I hate to say it. It should be in their training. We just tell everybody what's going to happen. We explain the procedure. If the court is empty, we take them into the court and show them where they'll be sitting and who will be sitting where, so that they know, and it's not a surprise when they walk in and feeling too strange. And we show them the facilities of the court, and if available, we would always offer them tea or coffee or something. And then we sit with them and explain to them we'll be with them throughout the court.
It's not like a criminal court where you have prosecution and defence. It's not like a civil court where you have lawyers on each side arguing. This is run by the coroner.
This is run by the coroner, and lawyers very often are not there. It's quite unusual for lawyers to be there, actually. So we're able to help by looking after the families and witnesses if they get distressed. If anyone gets very distressed and wants to go out, that's fine. And we go out with them and sit with them, talk to them until they're happy to come back or want to sit out there forever. Sometimes we have 2 volunteers on so that one can remain in the court and one would come out if anyone gets distressed. That in a big inquest, that would happen.
Coroners see this all the time. They're used to people being distressed. But I suppose different coroners deal with this in different ways?
Completely, yes. I think you'll find most coroners' courts are all different to each other, largely from their situation, the location where they are. I mean, I think there's one still sitting in a made-up court. I know when we set up in Reading, he was in the town hall, which was occupied until 12 o'clock. Come 12 o'clock, we had to rush in, set up the court for him, microphones and everything. It was shocking.
Because local authorities provide the accommodation for coroners' courts, and some are willing to spend more money than others.
Exactly.
And also the way in which coroners conduct an inquest is very much up to them.
It is. It does vary enormously from court to court. The basics are there, but some of them like to read everything out. Others, perhaps of the more experienced ones, as you get in the criminal courts, more experienced judges know what has to be said and what doesn't have to be said.
Coroners are different, but what would you like to see a coroner do? What's the best way that a coroner can behave at an inquest?
To put the family to the centre of the inquest, to react with them, speak to them, and make it all about them, which is what was said in the Justice Act and doesn't always happen. But no, that is what it's so essential, to make the family feel it's there for them.
And how can the coroner help the family? I've seen some bereaved family members bringing photographs of the person who's died.
Yes, they do, yeah.
It's not perhaps what you would expect in a courtroom, but it's right for an inquest.
But it's so relaxed. There's no verdict, remember. It's just a conclusion, and it's much more relaxed. And if people get upset, the coroner will adjourn the inquest temporarily, and the people come outside and calm down. And yes, so it is. It's nothing to be afraid of. But of course, the word court immediately makes you feel afraid. We all have pictures of the criminal court, not of the coroner court, don't we?
What do coroners' courts look like? You said they vary in appearance.
They vary enormously, yes. Some are sort of just rooms made up into courts. I was down in Horsham last week, where they have finally given the coroner her own court, rather than going to Chichester to hear things and all over the county of West Sussex. And she's finally got this lovely setup now in Horsham. Now, if you go to Oxford, then you've got the coroner up on high, and then gradually you come down in layers, and there's hardly room to sit because it's so old. Somehow the volunteers manage. It's up and down and up and down. I tell you, it's quite difficult. As I said, Horsham now, which is just a large room with the tables laid out, the coroner's table and the coroner's officer's table, and it looks much more relaxed.
And that's perfectly possible, and it's really up to the local authority which pays for the court to decide what sort of premises to provide and how much they're prepared to spend on the court.
Yes, and some are and some aren't.
Now tell me a little bit more about your volunteers. Tell me about what they're trained to do and tell me what they're there for.
The volunteers apply, we interview them with a set of questions that we stick to, and we make sure whether they are suitable or not. They then go to the local court they're applying to, and they sit through several inquests, and we try and make them varied inquests, so that some are more traumatic than others, particularly a baby death, which can get to people, and you have to be very certain that that person applying has not had to go through that herself. So they do that at least 2 or 3 different inquests, and we make sure of that. And then if they're still happy to continue, and I can tell you quite a few say, I've decided it's not for me. If they decide to go ahead, and we think they're fine to go ahead, they will shadow an experienced volunteer in that court, seeing exactly what she does. And then they get quite confident with that. And then they go through a training, which takes 2 days. A lot of it, if it's volunteers coming from different courts, we now hold online, which saves us a lot of money. But if it's for just one court, it's always done together face to face, so that the team begin to know each other, which is so important.
And what qualities are you looking for in volunteers?
I suppose a lot of our volunteers are retired. They have the time because they've got to be there until the court closes. So that's from 9 a.m. possibly, could be later than 5 sometimes, some occasions. So that does mean you don't work. You can't take time off from work to do that. You just get a feeling, you know. You just get that feeling when you're interviewing people and you know they'll be right.
Are they mostly women?
We do have men. Yes, we do, but not very many, I have to admit.
You said it's cheaper to train them online. This whole system, the Coroner's Court Support Service, does cost money.
It does cost a lot of money, yes. Our main outgoing is the staff. And we have to have the staff to look after the volunteers, which is very, very important. And of course, we also have a helpline now, which is busy. And they're getting calls from Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, where we're not. We'd got one court in Wales, and then it all came to a full stop because of the pandemic. We do need the staff, definitely, more than we've got now.
And the staff obviously coordinate the volunteers, support the volunteers.
Yes, support the volunteers.
And liaise with the courts.
And liaise with the courts, yes. And then if it gets a bit too much for them, it'll go to their regional manager or then up to the CEO. But we have very little problems because I think we do give such a rigorous training to make sure we've got the right person.
How many coroner's courts can you cover?
At the moment, we're in 44 of the coronal areas. There are 72. So we've still got some way to go, but we're actually covering 49 courts because some of them sit in 2 courts in different places in the area.
And what of the future? Expansion?
Expansion when we have the money. We can't do anything until we get more funds in, and our funds are rapidly running out.
Who pays you then? Where does the money come from?
Well, we get a small amount from each local authority, and that has to be agreed before we'll start in their court. We're currently asking them to up it, and I'm so glad to say that they are, but it's not a huge amount.
A medium-sized court, how much would you expect the local authority to pay?
On the old one, about 4,000.
£4,000 a year is not a huge amount for a local authority.
No, but we're asking them to double it, and they're so pleased with us now. They feel, and the coroners say we can't work without you now, which is absolutely wonderful. We couldn't have upped it years ago because it was still very much shaky, but now it's not, and we're accepted. And yes, they are putting it up. So once that's all been worked through, our income will help enormously. But we've got to get there. And meanwhile, can we hang on?
Can you hang on?
I think so. We're going to anyway. I don't care what happens. We're going to somehow.
But you're short of cash for next year, and presumably you'd like to expand into other courts.
We must expand, yes, we must. You can't itemise it just down to a few courts. We've got to be in every court in England and Wales. And that's what Annie and I wanted when we first started. We never thought it would take this long, but it has.
And are you looking for charitable donations?
Very much so, yeah, very much so. We applied to trusts and foundations, but that's so difficult at the moment. So many charities are asking for money, and a lot of them have closed their applications, not taking any more applications. I do some, and I sort of make it fairly powerful, I think.
How do you persuade these charities to cough up the money for inquests?
Yes, it's a funny one, actually, isn't it? But I suppose it's support of their community, isn't it? That's to the local ones. There are a lot of local charities we can approach. They are usually quite generous and do, 1,000, 2,000, but, it all adds up and to help pay for the volunteers' expenses, I just put it as it is.
I suppose most people can't imagine having to find themselves in a coroner's court because they've been bereaved.
No, they can't. It's the thing you don't think about. And, when we first started, Annie and I just could not believe the first questions of people coming in, of all types, witnesses, otherwise. What's a coroner? What's an inquest?
And I was assuming that you were dealing with bereaved families, but as you say, it's witnesses as well. And you're talking about, the London Underground train drivers.
Yeah. And car drivers, yes, we do. Everyone who comes to the court will be looked after.
It must be traumatic for a train driver, a bus driver, a lorry driver when somebody steps out, either deliberately or accidentally.
Awful, just awful. They're in pieces when they come in, they really are. And I have been told, we had a meeting, Annie and I, years ago, we had a meeting with the underground staff, and they said the majority of them can never work again.
It's not their fault.
It's not their fault, no. But suicide is you feel desperately for the person who's committed it, because they must be in a terrible way to do it. You feel for their family, but you also feel for those affected by it. Even if you've only been a passenger on a tube station watching someone, you wouldn't forget. It's just awful, just awful.
And you meet these people because they're brought along to coroner's courts as witnesses?
Yes. And they have to stand up and give their evidence.
And how can you help them?
By talking to them, sitting with them, letting them unload after the inquest. The staff don't have time to do that, as you can imagine. They're all working so hard, the coroner's officers, and they haven't got the time to spend time sitting there. Very good example, if I can give you one, was one up in a court in the north. We are not there at the moment, and someone was going there because her partner had taken his own life, and she wanted to find out. She was on her own, and she rang our helpline, and they passed it over to the manager, and we found a volunteer from a nearby court, and he offered to go, and it was a 2-day inquest, and he sat with her throughout, and she wrote a lovely letter at the end saying, "Thank you so much, I couldn't have done it without him." He sat with me, and after it was over for the day, we went out for coffee and talked it through, and he made I was safe to drive home before he let me go. And she said it made all the difference to have someone there just for me.
And if people want to know more about what you do, either want to volunteer or make a donation to support you, they can search online?
They can go to our website, coronerscourtssupportservice.org.uk. And you'll find the helpline number on there, and please do ring them Monday to Friday, and they'll help you and tell you what it's all about and what to expect.
And despite all the challenges, you're absolutely determined to carry on, I can see.
We are absolutely determined. The volunteers have said to me, we know how important it is. We are going to carry on, and I will certainly carry on.
You've done all sorts of things in your long life, if I may say so. Victim support, supporting witnesses and so on. But it seems to me this is the most important thing you've done?
It is, without a doubt. It's the most important thing I've done, and I'm so pleased I was given the chance to do it.
Rowie Burden, OBE, founding trustee of the Coroner's Court Support Service. I'm Joshua Rosenberg, and thank you for listening to A Lawyer Talks.